When you think of Bong Joon-ho's filmography, which movies come to mind? I would guess, for most viewers, there's a certain set of films that make up the list of usual suspects. We think of movies like Parasite, Memories of Murder, The Host, or even Okja. And, to be clear, there's a reason we think about these films. Memories of Murder is not only the best crime drama I've ever seen, it's one of the best movies I've ever seen, period. Okja, released on Netflix, reached a wide audience of viewers. And Parasite, with its groundbreaking place in modern culture, is virtually impossible to ignore. In fact, the first video I made for this channel is partially about Parasite. There's something irresistible about that film, something that demands to be discussed. But today, I want to talk about another of Bong Joon-ho's movies. It's a movie he released in 2009, and in my view, it's a perfect film, quite literally flawless front to back. The movie I want to talk about is Bong Joon-ho's cinematic masterpiece, Mother. The basic premise of the movie is easy enough to outline. A woman whose name we never learn lives alone with her son, Da-jun, who has some kind of intellectual disability. They are an impoverished family, they live in a small home, and it's clear that raising Da-jun is a challenge for his mother, but their lives are simple enough. And then one day, the unthinkable happens. Da-jun is taken from his mother, arrested and charged with the murder of a local schoolgirl, Ah-jung. And so his mother, her whole life thrown off course, her only and dearly beloved child ripped from her arms by the law, goes on a quest to liberate her son and clear his name. When I first watched this film several years ago, I wasn't just mesmerized by the story. Of course, that was part of it. With a Bong Joon-ho film, that's pretty much a given. But I wasn't just interested, I was deeply moved. I felt like the film reached an emotional pitch that I struggled to articulate. I could feel it. Something was happening here that connected with me profoundly, but at the time, I couldn't really say what it was. All I knew was that I couldn't stop thinking about it. Now, having rewatched the film multiple times, I'd like to try to outline what it does so perfectly. That is the humble goal of this video, to put into words what makes this work of art so unforgettable. Of course, in order to address everything, I'll have no choice but to spoil the movie, so if you haven't seen it yet, I would recommend pausing the video here. This is one of those films that deserves to be watched unspoiled. So what is it then? What is this movie's great achievement? I want to focus on how the film constructs character, the way it creates personalities and pulls us into them, makes us care for them in their deepest humanity. And the main point I want to make is, in its own way, a relatively simple one. What this movie does so perfectly, I think, is champion the poor, the outcast, and the abnormal without reducing them to a caricature. What I mean is this. So often, in stories about the downtrodden, there's a certain temptation to romanticize, almost fetishize the plight of the destitute. It's easy for storytellers to give us this kind of plotline. Here is a poor character, someone pushed to the margins of human society, and yes, they are flawed, but they're flawed because of their position, their station in life, their class. If they only had money, if they only had the respect and acknowledgement of the world that surrounds them, then they wouldn't be so bad. In stories of this kind, we're made to feel that the characters are victims of their world, that if their world weren't so evil, they wouldn't be incentivized to do wicked things. And to be fair, this is partially true. It's no secret that poverty forces people into situations they may otherwise have avoided. Parasite, in fact, is a film that stages this struggle quite clearly. But I think it's worth acknowledging that this idea, when taken too far, risks becoming its own cliché. And the reason I think Mother works so well is because, at every step, it emphatically rejects this mindset. No, it says, these characters, strange and bizarre and violent as they are all flawed, and not flawed because they are poor, because of the hand that life has dealt them, but because they are human beings, because being a complete and living person necessarily entails being imperfect. Let me get more specific. Who are the characters in this story, and what exactly do we know about them? Well, on the one hand, there is Ah-jung, the young girl murdered in the night. Slowly, over time, we learn that she herself is poor, that her parents aren't around to take care of her, and that she instead lives with her grandmother, a terrible alcoholic. We later learn that she is so poorly taken care of by her grandmother that, in spite of her young age, she resorts to having sex with local men in exchange for rice. She is, it seems, something like a perfect victim. Then there is Da-jun himself, the boy accused of killing her. He lives, as we already know, with an intellectual disability, and he is constantly made fun of by the other characters. In particular, he can't stand it when people call him stupid, an idiot, or, worst of all, refer to him with the R slur. After being arrested, he's forced by the police to sign a false confession we aren't even sure he understands, and so we once again see that he is victimized by the system, exploited and uncared for. Then there is his mother, the impoverished widow raising a son on her own, selling herbs and doing acupuncture for a living, unanimously rejected by the community members who all agree her son is guilty. She can't even convince the local attorneys to meaningfully take on her case. No one takes her seriously, no one hears her cries, and we're made to feel for her, to acknowledge the injustice of her situation. And there are side characters too, other people we're asked to root for. At one moment, we see the mother leaving the police station. She's just attempted to clear her son's name by suggesting that another boy, his so-called friend Jin-tae, is the real killer, but she has failed, and so she leaves to walk home in the rain. A policeman offers to give her an umbrella, but she ignores him, too prideful, and we can hardly blame her for that. These are the same people who have taken her son away. When walking home, she passes by a man pulling a cart with an odd assortment of trinkets, and she carefully takes an umbrella off of his cart. As far as we can tell, the old man doesn't even notice, and we know she could easily steal it. But she doesn't. She turns to the man and offers him 2 bills. He, of course, has every right to take both of them, but he doesn't do that either. He takes one and lets her keep the other. It's moments like these that really humanize these people. She could have stolen the umbrella, but she chose not to. He could have taken both bills, but he chose to do otherwise. Both of them seem to acknowledge something. You're poor and struggling, and so am I, so I won't take advantage of you. I won't behave in the same way as our world. This is how the movie goes about constructing these characters, and for a long time, it's hard for us to feel anything but a deep, inescapable sympathy for them. All of them, it seems, are underdogs, outcasts, and we have little room to do anything but grieve the treatment with which they're greeted. And yet, this hopeful view of their personalities can't last forever. Someone has to be the killer. And this is where the movie so masterfully complicates its personalities. Gradually, we find out that all of these characters have done terrible things. For starters, we learn that years ago, when Da-jun was 5, his mother tried to kill him by forcing him to drink insecticide. She then planned to kill herself in the same way. Obviously, it didn't work. They only became sick. But she did try to end their lives. The old man with the cart, we learn, is a junk collector, and he is one of the local men who has had sex with Ah-jung, taking advantage of her poverty for his own perverse pleasure. Once we learn that, he doesn't seem so sympathetic. And of course, the biggest reveal of all. We find, eventually, that Da-jun is the real killer. He did, in fact, murder Ah-jung, but why did he do it? What set him off? He did it because she threw a stone at him, stared him in the eyes, and called him the R slur herself. He threw the stone back, hitting her in the head and killing her, seemingly not understanding what he was doing. The point is that none of these people are blameless. None of them are perfect victims. Da-jun is a killer. The junk collector is a creep. Da-jun's mother is a would-be child murderer, and Ah-jung mocks Da-jun for his disability. And from here, things only get worse. The mother will later find out, after paying the junk collector a visit, that he is the one and only person who saw her son commit murder. Knowing him to be the only witness, she murders him in cold blood and then sets his house ablaze. Now, she's a killer for real. But then, moments later, she's visited by a detective who brings her good news. "Don't worry," he says, "we found the real killer." Of course, the woman knows that her son is the killer, But now the blame has been placed on another boy, the so-called crazy JP, another intellectually disabled boy with no parents to defend him, no mother to protect him from the world. But rather than stand up for him, rather than tell the truth and let this poor boy walk free, she allows him to take the fall. Da-jun is set free, and JP is imprisoned for a crime the mother knows he didn't commit. So where does all this leave us? Who exactly is our hero? Again, we find that the film is more complicated than it looks. Yes, these characters are all, in their own way, sinners. They have all, to varying degrees, done something wrong. But what the film so successfully accomplishes is this. In spite of their flaws, in spite of their obvious sins, we do still feel for these people. Yes, the mother tried to kill her son and then herself all those years ago. But why? Well, she tells us herself. Because they were desperately, desperately poor, living a life of immense suffering, and because she so terribly wanted something better. I should have used a stronger poison, she says to a friend. If I had, we'd be frolicking in heaven's flower garden right now, instead of suffering. What a powerful line. Is the thing she tried to do horrible, unforgivable? Yes, absolutely, and the film never asks us to pretend like it's okay. The murder of a child is unthinkable. And yet, in spite of our acknowledgement of the absolute immorality of what she attempted, isn't there some sense in which we still feel for her in this moment? This world is one of suffering, she says, one of a vast and frightening injustice, and I want nothing more than to dance in the heavens with my child. I think what the film equips us for, here, is to agree with that sentiment, to grieve on her behalf, even though we don't accept the decision she tried to make. And the point I want to make is that this applies to almost every character. The junk collector, yes, is a creep for what he did with Ah Jung, but in the moment when the mother kills him and burns down his house, did he do anything wrong? Did he deserve that? The only reason she did it is because she knew he was going to report her son's crime, a crime he really did see Da-jun commit. In that moment, at least, he's completely in the right, and she kills him for it. And what about Da-jun? Yes, he really is the killer. He really did murder that girl. But not only did he do it because of what she called him, the coldness and cruelty with which she mocked his disability, but we still, by the end of the film, aren't entirely sure that he truly understands what he did. After he killed her, he dragged her body to the top of the building, hoping someone would find her, that they would take her to the hospital and get her some help. Did he even understand that she was dead? Even Ah Jung herself is made to inhabit an ambiguous position. Remember, she is poor, outcast, taken advantage of by men in the neighborhood and mocked. And yet she mocks Da-jun in turn. This is certainly unfair. It's bitter and harsh and unkind. But does she deserve to die for it? Does that one moment of viciousness render her whole life meaningless? No, of course not. The punishment doesn't match the crime. And so even though, in the moment, when we see her use the R slur when speaking to Da-jun and we like her that much less, we still acknowledge that what has happened to her, not just in this moment but over the course of her entire life, is incredibly, profoundly unfair. In the end, when Da-jun's mother goes to visit JP, to see the boy who has taken her son's place in prison, she weeps when he sits before her. Yes, she has done a terrible thing, and she herself knows it, but there is something so unspeakably, impossibly sad about her situation. Allow an innocent boy to go to jail, or confess and let her own son, himself innocent in a way, take his place, be sent to prison, and therefore lose the other half of her already ailing soul. We might look at this woman and recognize, even emphatically admit, that what she is doing is wrong. But I think it's very, very difficult for us to hate her for it. This is why I think this movie is so profound, and this is what I mean when I say it champions these people, these poor and strange and outcast people, without reducing them to a caricature. We don't root for them because they're blameless, because they're perfect victims, only made bad by their world. No, the movie doesn't pretend that they're completely innocent, and it doesn't ask us to believe that either. These are complex, multifaceted people. They sometimes do terrible things. They make questionable decisions. And still, In spite of that, the movie equips us to feel for them, to hope for something better on their behalf. It's the dual nature of this experience, the simultaneity with which we recognize that these characters do awful things while still yearning for them to find a better life, that makes this movie so emotionally captivating. As a final example, think about the interrogation scene when Da-joon is first arrested. How do we assess this scene in retrospect, now that we know he's the killer? I said, earlier in this video, that the police force him to sign a false confession. But now we know he really did do it. So in what sense is this confession false? Well, actually, I stand by that claim. This is a false confession. What they are doing is objectively wrong, even though Da-joon is the murderer. But how could that be? Because, as the police themselves admit, they aren't even sure Da-joon can read what he's signing. They have no tangible proof that he did it, no physical evidence, and yet here they are, intimidating this intellectually disabled young man, a man who has no attorney present to defend him, urging him to sign a document condemning himself to prison without even being certain that he understands what he's doing. And so, even though we do find out he's the killer, we can still say, in the moment, this is wrong. This is unjust. Da-joon, in spite of his status as the killer of the schoolgirl, is being mistreated in this scene, and I think this vignette really captures the moral complexity of the entire film. Again and again, in this movie, we're greeted with characters who aren't perfect, who do make bad decisions, but we can still recognize that the world treats them unfairly, and it is on the basis of this injustice that we root for them. We don't need to believe that they're flawless, that they move through the world in a kind of blameless fog. We root for them because they're people, and that means they will inevitably do bad things. They will make choices we disagree with, and they will eventually do things that we ourselves might never consider, but that is part of what it means to be a person. This is what I mean when I say these characters are so deeply realized. They feel so genuine, so alive, and in spite of their many mistakes, I do hope for better lives for all of them. For Da-joon, for his mother, for Ah-jung, and especially for JP. It is in the very depth of their moral complexity, the absolute refusal of the film to treat them like innocent bystanders to their world, that I connect with their profoundest humanity. They are complex, problematic, and dynamic characters. They are thrust into a world that is itself problematic and strange, and they move through that world in the same way the rest of us do, in confusion, in sadness, in grief, and most of all, with a desperate hope for something better, for something like a taste of heaven. And what the film asks us in its conclusion is this: how far would you go? Which lines would you cross in order to defend your child, to give them a better life? Rather than answer that question, the film ends by simply forcing us to sit with it, holding that terrible question in our hands, a question perhaps unanswerable, but a question all too human. What an incredible film this is.